Ask Congressman Tom Emmer any question you want. He is with Minnesota's 6th District. Hi there.
How you doing, Roshini?
I'm doing great. Last time we spoke, you were live in Selma, and we chatted with you on the phone. And that was an extraordinary experience, I understand.
That was. It was back in March. It was, think about it, Roshini. You've got John Lewis, who led the original march, leading the march last March.
I know, for the 50th anniversary.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And then I think those that were there, you and I, we may have talked that Sunday, so the day after the actual march.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think I talked to you, I want to say it was right after George Wallace's daughter, Peggy Wallace Kennedy, had just addressed a crowd of us on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol when, in effect, she apologized to John Lewis for what her dad had done so many years ago. And it was, I don't think there was a dry eye on the place.
Right. So moving. And those are some of the things you get to do. You also took some flack for doing that from members of your own party. And we talked about how I really like that you're a straight talker, a straight shooter. You have had quite a momentum going, even in the short time in Congress.
Well, and again, back to that, I don't know that when you said I took some flack from folks in my own party, there were some Tea Party folks who didn't understand where I was, and they had referenced that I went to some parade.
He was in Selma, people.
Right, and I think if you were to have them sitting here right now, they'd probably be a little red-faced because they now understand where it was I was. This is important to all of us,
and they
right?
Probably wish they were there. But,
I think so.
Let's not cry over that spilled milk. Let's talk Cuba. You're trying to get Cuba, the embargo lifted, all these big things going on. Tell folks about that.
Well, I don't think a lot of people, to put the Cuban embargo in place. First, the Cuban embargo was put in place under President Kennedy. It was instituted, why, Roshini? It was instituted to undermine a communist government and to give the Cuban people back their right to self-determine, to control their own destiny. Since the embargo was put in place, we've had 11 U.S. presidents.
Amazing.
I don't think a lot of people know. I think they know that, but they don't sit down and put it in perspective. I was, I'm now over the age of 50, so it's basically been in place my entire lifetime. If it would have worked, if the embargo would have worked, it should have worked in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed, because the Soviet Union was the Castro regime's lifeline to the world. When it collapsed, a lot of people might remember when you had raft full of Cuban refugees trying to escape, trying to get to the United States.
I remember those visual images when I was a younger person.
Right.
Almost daily.
Cubans were starving. If it were going to have worked, that's when it should have worked. And instead what it did was it allowed a charismatic leader, and whether people like this or not, Fidel Castro, if nothing else, is charismatic. He was able to point the finger at the United States and blame the Cuban people's suffering on the embargo instead of acknowledging that it was in fact the communist regime. Since then, they've opened up very little pieces of freedom. For instance, they have privately owned restaurants. They have some privately owned beauty shops, barber shops. They have other private enterprise, but not on a grand scale. And where they are today is the Cuban people and, in fact, the government, which no longer will refer to itself as a communist government. In fact, when we were there in early June, one of my colleagues referenced the communist government, and the foreign minister quickly snapped back, "We are not communists, we are socialists." So it shows you, there is, but it shows you more importantly to me that everything is in transition, and they think that what they need is this exposure to the free marketplace. And for me, whether it's China or Vietnam or you name the place in the world, once you start to expose the people to the free market, to opportunities that can provide, once you start to allow the people the ability to self-determine through their own hard work, right, and the opportunity, the change takes place rather quickly. And people shouldn't misunderstand. There are still issues with Cuba. They still harbor fugitives. The government is still very controlling. There are human rights issues. But I believe the time has come for the Cuban people to lift the embargo so that the Cuban people have the opportunity to start to self-determine. Then we have to understand it's not just economic, right? It's not just trade. It's not allowing Americans better opportunities to trade with Cubans, but allow Cuban people to trade with Americans. It's also a matter of national security, Roshini. Cuba is a very important island in the Western Hemisphere as far as we're concerned. And when Raul Castro steps down in 2018, there will be a transition period. There will be a new government. There could be some instability. It just makes sense to me that the United States of America should actually be there when that happens.
Right. It would be helpful if when that new person takes over, they have some friendly connections with us. I'm talking with 6th District Congressman Tom Emmer. He's on the porch with me here. If you have any questions for him, come right up. I'll take them right here at the porch, or text us 81807. So lots of things going on in your district. I understand on Thursday you held your 10th town hall meetings since joining the Congress. Why is it important to you to do those town halls?
It's about customer service. I mean, the other thing is I enjoy them. I like people. One thing I found out when I ran for office, I ran for a state office for the first time. Most people don't realize this, just 10 years ago. Back then I was probably about 40 pounds lighter and my hair was a lot darker. But once I got into that, I realized I really enjoy service. And when I ran for this office, I had a different run a few years ago that after it was over, I kind of thought my public service was over. And I was fine with that until my predecessor announced she was going to retire. And I was encouraged to run for this. And when I got back into it, it was about dealing with people one-on-one. So when we got to Congress, one of the things I wanted to make sure we did is don't stop making that connection with people. We've had, like you said, 10 town halls. We've had telephone town halls. We've had town halls by Twitter.
Really? Yeah, very interesting.
It is very interesting.
And by the way, his hashtag is Rep Tom Emmer on Twitter.
That's right. But it's all about staying in contact with the people that you work for, the people that you represent. And we had the 10th one, like you say, was Thursday night in Forest Lake. I don't know, I didn't count, but maybe we had as many as 75 people that showed up, filled a room in the city hall, and like all the others, it was a great discussion. People show up, tell them a little bit about what we've been working on in the first 7 months that I've been in Congress, and then literally we take their questions and have a discussion about whatever the issue might be for them.
I'm a big believer that even though you represent the 6th District, which is a mouthful, you represent all the people of Minnesota. And regardless of party, what can you tell people about what you're doing for the state of Minnesota?
I love that you just set it up that way, because most people talk about whether they're activists in their party, whether they're donating to specific candidates, or whether they just like to pay attention to politics, and it's not a matter of being a Republican or a Democrat. It's a matter of taking ownership in where we're at, right? And that's voting, that's knowing who you're voting for. But I don't think enough people do what you just did, which is we have 8 congressional seats that belong to the state of Minnesota. They don't belong to the people that are sitting in those seats. They actually belong to the citizens of the state of Minnesota. And the way I look at it is you break the 8 up geographically, and then you have a cross-section of the population in each one of those 8 districts elect someone to represent them that should have their political perspective. But we can't forget that once you have that election certificate, you actually are a representative for the state of Minnesota. Your constituents within your district send you to Washington, but the decisions you're going to make, they'll reflect that political perspective. They should. But your job is literally to represent Minnesota in the Congress of the United States.
Right, and that's why they say you're part of the Minnesota delegation, right? In our Congress, those 8 Congress people, those 2 senators, the 10 of you are representing the state.
That's right. But the senators, they don't get broken down by district,
no,
obviously.
They truly do represent the whole state. But I really feel strongly about that. I mean, there were times when, regardless of who was in office, different Congress people would say, I'm not going to be at the State of the Union. And I'm thinking, let's go back to the Constitution.
No, that's right.
The president is supposed to give this address every January on this specific date, and you are representing the country and your state, not just your district. You better be in your seat.
And Roshini, it's even beyond that. If you don't show up, then why are you there?
Exactly.
I mean, you may disagree. That's one of the reasons that why we have such a wonderful government in this country. Think about what happens in a country where you have a disagreement and you're not allowed to share it. You're not allowed to speak it.
Or you're shot. I mean,
that's what I mean.
That's the point. The beauty of this country is we can freely speak our minds.
That's
Hopefully in a civil, respectful way, but we can have different opinions. We can be part of different parties. I tend to not really, I vote for the person, not really the party, and I love having all different kinds of politicians and office holders on my show. So it's important to me to try to find balance in that. But I will challenge anyone, regardless of the party. How are you representing the people of the U.S., the people of Minnesota?
So you asked me what I've been working on. Before I went to Congress, I got some advice from a former U.S. Senator, Rudy Boschwitz, who said, when you get to Congress, there's going to be all kinds of things that you can get involved in. There's an issue for everything. And his advice to me was, if you want to be effective, if you want to have a productive experience in Congress, when you get there, focus on the one thing. Find the one thing that's in your wheelhouse that makes sense for who you are and what you represent. And it's interesting. It doesn't mean that you don't work on anything else, but it means you focus on something and you become an expert in that area. Well, it was, for me, they appointed me initially to the Agriculture Committee, which made sense for the 6th Congressional District, because the 6th Congressional District, even though it's ex-urban, in other words, a lot of people who work in industries and firms in Minneapolis and St. Paul, they have bigger spaces and they move out 30, 40 miles. They might end up living in the 6th Congressional District. But more than 50% of the ground in the district, Roshini, is still in agricultural production. Second, they put me on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which was a little bit of a surprise because it's not something that we might deal with every day in our business or in our personal lives, but it's something that I was interested in, and the two of them combined told me what the issue was going to be for me, and that was trade.
Excellent.
Well, you look at the state of Minnesota, and people need to keep in mind, we're a state of about 5.3 million people based on the 2013 census. The two main drivers of our private economy are agriculture and manufacturing, and we're still home to 17 Fortune 500 companies. Minnesota is all about trade.
Yeah.
And going forward, 90 to 95% of our future customers actually reside outside of the United States.
Yeah, we are going to take a real quick break and then more with Congressman Tom Emmer when we come back. Roshini Rajkumar back with you. We are winding it down at the Minnesota State Fair for this edition of News and Views. And Tom Emmer, Congressman from the 6th District, is my guest. I understand, Congressman Emmer, that you are really using technology to the advantage of your constituents. Tell us about it.
Well, we're trying to, and we're going to use it even more on the ground. But I was telling you during the break that we've actually Skyped into high school classrooms. My favorite was a high school civics class, a senior group at Buffalo High School. And the Skype is a great way to do it because you do it from your office. They're at the end of their last 15, 20 minutes of class, and the professor lights it up, and then these young people, can't call them kids anymore really because they're 17, 18 years old, we have a discussion through Skype, which I got to tell you, Roshini, that's how I talk to my own kids, or I try to, from Washington, D.C. when I go back and forth. So it really is a natural extension of what these guys have taught me how to do with all the new technology. It's really not the same as when I was in college, we won't say how many years ago, and we got to call home on Sunday night.
Yeah, it really isn't the same. And speaking of kids, you do have several of your own back-to-school time at the Emmer household.
Wonderful.
And you've got the range, right?
Oh,
College.
Yeah. Actually, we only have 2 left at home. Yeah,
Almost empty
they've all
nesters.
moved on.
Yeah.
They've all moved on. In fact, our 5th child he graduated from high school in Delano in June. We're going to go see him graduate from basic. He enlisted in the Navy a year ago, and
Sweet.
Yeah, we're going to see it Friday.
Excellent. What's your advice to parents, and what are some things that Minnesotans can count on, that our delegation is working on?
In terms of, I think Chairman Klein just passed a school reform bill, and it's called the Student Achievement Act, I think, of 2015, or it's probably got some fancier name than that. But we just passed that a couple months ago, and what it does, Roshini, the idea is to try and put parents and local authorities back in control of schools. The rage a few years ago was more of this federal control in our schools and this top-down, you got to do this curriculum, you got to have these tests, you got to have these measurements to show. I think we're in a point now where we found that one size fits all, it doesn't work. And you got to empower parents once again and your professional educators at the local level to make these decisions. So that law, if the president, if it ultimately gets through the Senate and the president would sign it, it would put educators at the local level back in charge. The testing, it would allow them to determine how best to measure the progress of their students, and it would, I think, give parents a better ability to control where their students are, what they're learning, and making sure that they're meeting those measurement marks.
You have a busy day at the fair after you leave us. You are a celebrity taster at the Minnesota Farmers Union Minnesota Cooks Cook-Off. Do you know what you're getting into?
I do, and I've been, there are others that have predated me, including Senator Klobuchar, and I would like to tell you I watched a tape of how she did it, but I didn't. No, I'm looking forward to it. It's all about that farm to food to table, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Concept, because I think a lot of our folks today don't realize the food doesn't come from Byerly's. It doesn't come from Jerry's. It doesn't come from Cub.
Right.
It comes from the farm, and people want to know more about where it comes from and, frankly, how we're raising it and how we're processing it and what's in it when it ultimately gets to our table. And it's kind of exciting, actually.
It's very exciting. Well, you have fun with your taste testing and being that celebrity taster. Congressman Tom Emmer is representing the state of Minnesota from the 6th District. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks,
really
Roshini.
Great to have you on. Let's give him a round of applause here from our studio audience out here. You have a great rest of your fair Sunday.
You too, Roshini. Great to meet you in person.
All right, you too. And we will be back next